Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our McMain Arts Ministry presentation for Waverly Matthews. And Waverly is the founder and host of the weekly WAMA Art Asylum Brunch, which is short for Waverly Matthews. And he's director of the Off-Broadway Gallery at Pine Street Church in Boulder, which is just down the street from us. And Waverly has a background in theology and philosophy and religious studies. And Mr. Matthews explores the wisdom of art, spirituality, and the great ideas with his art asylum community over at Pine Street. And that's his weekly classes, and he also does very amazing art pilgrimage style tours. So Waverly holds a Master's of Divinity from Union Presbyterian Seminary and the Master's of Theological Studies from Iliff School of Theology, where he specialized in the philosophy of aesthetics. So Waverly often describes himself as a missionary for the artist gospel. And so we welcome him today because he will enhance our spiritual journey by showing us a new perspective, a new way to see into art. And thank you so much, Waverly.
Well, thank you again for having me here. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be able to present to you. I've been asked to do a little review, and I'll do that in a second here. But first, I've also been given permission to make a couple of marketing pitches. So like she said, I do art pilgrimage style tours. I've taken groups to Italy and France, and I'm doing one this spring to Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. This is what I think is the greatest value in tours on the market, not only for its price, includes 4-star lodging, but for what I do, I give you 4 presentations prior to leaving, digital presentations or in person if you'd like, on what you're going to see and experience on the tour. So you're very prepared once you go. I also offer you a journal, and we also have meetings during the tour. So it's almost like going on a spiritual retreat, but I use art and history. All right, so if you're interested, I do have brochures up here with the information. So please, if you have a strong interest, I only brought 13. If you have a real interest, please grab one of these. Also, this Friday, I want to bring to your attention, we have an opening reception for a new art exhibit called Silent Night. It is meant to be a contemplative art experience. These are artworks with the theme of nocturnes, so they lend themselves to contemplation. On the right, you can see the artists that we have. One of them is here. I won't embarrass her, but she is present. I might embarrass her after the meeting and introduce you to her. Wonderful works there. So if you're interested, 5 to 8 p.m. at the Off-Broadway Gallery at Pine Street Church on December 12th, this Friday. Now, for the brief review, however, I have been asked to retell my story of Epiphany, why I became a missionary for the gospel of art. And so I'll start with that. I was in seminary up in Philadelphia, and I used to go on Sundays to the Philadelphia Art Museum because it was free on Sundays. So I'd go there and look at the art. At the time, I was not an art expert, an art historian, never taken any classes in art whatsoever. I just liked looking at pretty pictures, just put it that way. But then I saw an advertisement for a special exhibit of the Barnes Foundation collection, one of the greatest Impressionist and Post-Impressionist collections in the entire world. So I said, oh, that looks interesting. So I bought my ticket, and I went to it. And it was a spiritual experience for me. Up to that point, I had a very kind of literal way of thinking. I thought that revelation only comes through the written word. That is what I had been taught. But it seems obvious now that before the written word, there was the image. We see that in cave paintings, don't we? That spiritual truths, transcendent experiences, vital ideas were communicated through imagery. Well, that's what I learned that day. Also, I sort of realized that I felt a truth from that experience that I could not articulate. Has anybody ever had that kind of experience? Felt a truth that you could not articulate. I couldn't articulate it, nor really understand it, so I went back to seminary at Iliff to study the philosophy of aesthetics. So that's why I went there. And then after that, I decided, well, I've got to teach this stuff to other people. Maybe they might have a similar experience if I do that. So this is not really art appreciation. I'm not about that. I'm about the belief that art really is a portal to a different sort of experience, a transcendent experience. It expands our minds, our hearts, our emotions in ways that are very powerful. So that is what I'm offering to you, and that is the mission of my life. Now, let me do a little bit of review here. Last week, we looked at the concept of hope through the eyes of the shepherds in this work. They're the group on the far right there, with the angel has an arm wrapped around one of them. The Mystic Nativity by Sandro Botticelli has baffled, and I would also say troubled, many academics, art historians, due to its religious perspective. It essentially contains two nativity narratives. Now, first, it contains the traditional one about the birth of the Christ child into the world to bring reconciliation between the human world and the spiritual world. But it also contains apocalyptic references, which is essentially about Christ returning to the world to bring a more lasting peace. Christ's return is a kind of rebirth, another nativity. Now, I'm going to pause just a second for those of you new to this work who weren't here last week to just take in the imagery. There's a lot going on, I know that. So take a moment with it and make note of what grabs your attention the most. Yes? I'm about to zoom in. And just so you know, I have no problem with people getting up and walking right up to the work, staring at it. You can do that if you want. I don't care. I'll probably do that myself. My eyes ain't so good these days. Probably time for a new prescription. All right, this work can be divided into three distinct sections, each conveying different aspects of Botticelli's apocalyptic vision. This is the top. A golden dome of heaven opens above the scene. It's almost inviting us into it. It's circled by 12 angels holding olive branches, which represent peace, They're entwined with scrolls, and on some of these scrolls hang crowns. They seem almost in a divine dance of jubilation at the birth of Christ, creating an atmosphere of almost ecstatic celebration. Now, notice the three angels on the roof. They represent faith, charity, and hope. They're dressed in their corresponding symbolic colors of white, red, and green. Angels are going to work in this painting like divine agents of reconciliation. Now we're going to zoom in on the middle of the painting. The traditional nativity scene unfolds beneath a simple thatched roof. The Virgin Mary kneels in adoration before the Christ child who's lying on the ground, reaching up toward her. Notice how large they are. That's one incredibly big child and one incredibly big mother. That's to emphasize their significance, their importance in this work. It says, "Pay attention to me." Now, Saint Joseph sort of squats in a very peculiar position. And we wondered last week, is this guy sleeping at such a momentous moment? And then we always have the ox and the donkey present, representing that this message is for both Jews and Gentiles, representing pretty much the universality of the message. Now, last week we focused on the shepherds on the far right there, emphasizing our own humble perspective, sense of lack of agency in life sometimes that we experience, and that is represented by the shepherds over there. Now, we're going to go to the bottom of the painting. Very unusual element, 3 pairs of angels. Are they wrestling them or are they embracing these men? We decided they're embracing them in this dance-like rhythm. At their feet, you might be able to see them, little demons. That one's got horns and big wide eyes. He's more easy to see. They're scurrying away. The angels have rescued these men from the talons of these demons. In other words, it's emphasizing this apocalyptic transformation and reconciliation where we are delivered from evil influences, if you want to put it that way, negative influences, and reunited to a spiritual kind of existence. Now, the painting was heavily influenced by the preaching of a radical friar named Girolamo Savonarola. After the death of it's going to pop up in a second here. After the death of the great Lorenzo the Magnificent, Lorenzo de' Medici, who was sort of the de facto ruler of Florence and the great patron of artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael, after his death, Savonarola basically became the de facto ruler, the main influencer of culture in Florence. He hoped to turn Florence into a new Jerusalem and called people to give up their luxuries and their pagan influences. And he employed bands of youth. This may sound familiar to those familiar with 20th century events. Employed bands of youth who went around the city to call citizens to lay their mirrors and their luxurious furs and clothing and silks, their pagan books and their art onto a pyre that we now know as the bonfire of the vanities. And people did so, including possibly Botticelli himself. I heard one of our members this morning on our Zoom call is from Italy, lived in Rome 40-some years, very knowledgeable individual. He said that the estimate is between 10 and 20% of all the art in Florence was burned up. If you know how much art was in Florence during the Renaissance, that's quite a number, quite staggering, all right? There's what people brought in to be burned up. So if you want to, go ahead and yell out a really nasty boo to Savonarola. I know you're feeling it. I know you're feeling it. Boo to Savonarola. However, there's another side to Savonarola, to his message, his radical critique of wealth and his repeated calls for economic justice. He attacked tyrants and condemned the church's alliance with the wealthy and the powerful at the expense of the poor. His preaching excoriated the rich and powerful who neglected and exploited the poor, calling them to account for their complicity in social injustice. His vision was unambiguous. The Medici family, who had been ruling Florence for about 70-odd years, he told them to reject material wealth. His message was revolutionary. Let the rich give to the poor. Let the churches be stripped of their excessive wealth. He sounds like a Robin Hood of the Renaissance. And let all live in strict observance of God's laws. That may sound a little bit oppressive. This was not merely rhetorical flourish. Savonarola lived what he preached. He required the monks at the San Marco monastery to sell all of their possessions and give the money to the poor. He himself lived a very austere life, not eating much of anything, a very scanty menu. This commitment to radical poverty stood in stark contrast to the opulence that characterized both secular and religious life in Renaissance Florence. Everybody hear me okay, by the way? All right, good. Savonarola's apocalyptic call for Florence to repent and turn back to a more austere and moral life resonated with Sandro Botticelli, if you can believe that. At least it appears to be the case from this painting. As I said, this painting is not so much about the first nativity, but more about the second nativity, the apocalyptic return of Christ. Now, when we take a good close look at this work, we see a more positive message, I think, the hope of reconciliation between what is spiritual and what is worldly, between what is divine and what is human, between the profound, the magnificent, and the humble. However, after my presentation last week, I found myself asking some questions. Is there really a dichotomy between the spiritual and the profane? Between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, between the divine and humans? How sharp is that boundary? I'm not so sure, so something to think about. Today I want to focus on the Magi, as represented in this work and the Christian nativity tradition. First of all, who were they? Well, simply put, they were philosophers from the East. Most believe they came from Persia. They're often dressed in Persian caps in all the iconography. Some would also call them astrologers, scientists of their day, really smart people. This relief is one of the earliest depictions of the Magi. We see 3 of them. By the way, the biblical account doesn't give us a number of Magi. They're presenting gifts to the infant who's eagerly accepting them. All right? Notice it's an infant, not a baby as well. These gifts are what? And what do they represent? Well, the gold symbolized the royalty, Christ as king. Frankincense was used during worship, so it is referencing his divine nature and worship of him. And then the myrrh is an embalming element, so it represents not only his future death, but our mortality as well. Let's flash forward to the Renaissance and the 2 artists who were the mentors of Sandro Botticelli, Fra Angelico and Fra Filippo Lippi. They joined forces to create this work, the Adoration of the Magi, sometime in the middle of the 15th century. Now, what immediately stands out to me when I look at this is the pomp and circumstance of the procession. Let's zoom in a little bit for those of you who might be having difficulty. Yeah, I'm going to mention the peacock in a little bit. The 3 Magi are dressed like wealthy merchants or even royalty, and they're accompanied by this massive entourage of attendants. This really looks like a sacred pilgrimage of wealthy seekers, desperate to encounter the divine. Now, when patrons commissioned adoration scenes with the Magi, dressed in spectacular clothes and presenting gifts in elaborate goldsmith vessels, they were celebrating wealth as a sign of God's favor. They were positioning themselves as latter-day Magi, wise, devout, and also prosperous. Pragmatically speaking, this was great PR for wealthy elites, wasn't it? Savonarola's attack on this culture was not merely spiritual, it was profoundly social and economic. He challenged the fundamental assumptions of Florentine society about the relationship between wealth and virtue. A few other notable details. Notice that Joseph is fully alert in this work, acknowledging the Magi's presence. That's very different than the mystic nativity. Now let's look at those peacocks. They're massive on the roof of the stable. In Renaissance art, peacocks symbolize immortality, resurrection, and paradise. That's because in the ancient world, people thought that peacock's flesh did not decay. I have no idea where they got that idea. Do we have any biologists here who might be able to enlighten us? So, anyway, shame on them for that idea. Now, just to the left of the peacocks, we notice 5 youth, or maybe young men, barely clothed. Most scholars believe they are symbolic representations of the passing away of the pagan world of Europe, making room for the Christian faith. Now, notice their setting. They're on the ruins of the classical world. What do you think that represents? Well, first of all, that the classical world of Greece and Rome is passing away. However, there is a direct connection with the Christian faith. Thinkers like Sandro Botticelli and the philosophers of the Renaissance thought that Christianity was actually the fulfillment of classical Greek philosophy. In fact, Plato, among early church leaders, was considered a prophet who predicted the coming of Christ. Now, here's one of Botticelli's early versions of the story. Again, the setting is in those classical ruins. There's not as massive of an entourage in this one, but still they are quite well dressed in this work. The 3 magi are represented by the Medici family members, who were likely patrons of the work. The Medici family, thanks to Cosimo de' Medici and his grandson Lorenzo the Magnificent, basically funded the entire Italian Renaissance. In fact, they were the catalyst, not only with their money, but what they did with it, because they were into ideas as well. And they sent scouts looking for manuscripts all over Europe and the Near East, and they funded scholars and libraries as well. Here's a close-up of Cosimo de' Medici. He's the one richly attired. Look at that embroidery. It looks like it's embroidered in gold, kneeling before the Christ child. All the Medici family depicted in this work embody the connection between earthly wealth and spiritual devotion that characterized Florentine religious art of the period. Now, on the far right, look on the far right, the young man in the tan cloak, Botticelli himself. Let's get our eyes back on Joseph. See him? Semi-awake, I'd say. Well, that reflects the biblical narrative directly. You see, Joseph receives dreams while he sleeps about the identity of the coming Christ child. Obviously, he needs them to relieve his concerns that his young wife is pregnant without his help. I don't know about you. I might need more than a few dreams to come to terms with that revelation, that situation. Now, a few years later, Botticelli painted this version. It resides in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., which is a part of my art pilgrimage. Quick plug there. Again, we have the decaying classical architecture as a setting suggesting the continuity between the ancient world and Christian philosophy. Now, the adoration of the Magi, as you can imagine, was a very popular subject in art, especially in Florence at the time, because one of the city's leading religious confraternities was filled with very wealthy, powerful people and based on the Magi. And every 5 years, they would have this great celebration and festival where the wealthiest people would play the role of the Magi, along with hundreds of attendants, all very well dressed, going through the streets of Florence, most likely riding camels. I could think of it as a Macy's Day Parade, but without the floats. Now notice the Magi on the far left with the beard. He has a crown on his head. The Magi have been transformed from wise philosophers into kings, very powerful kings. No wonder the wealthy families of Florence felt kinship with the Magi, especially the Medici, and wanted the population of the city to know that God had favored them with wealth, as long as they showed proper devotion to the church, of course. Notice how Joseph has been transformed again. Now smiling broadly, the proud father. That, of course, is going to change again once Botticelli has been influenced by the religious fervor inspired by Savonarola. This particular version of the Adoration of the Magi was begun after Botticelli had been influenced by Savonarola and really just before the Mystic Nativity. Look at the year, 1500. However, Botticelli did not complete it. He drew all of the figures and the architecture and the setting in a sepia hue, but artists in the 16th and 17th century came along and put color to it, at least the characters in the foreground. Notice that? All right? Notice, though, that they're no longer in the ruins of classical Greece and Rome. Where in the world are they? They look like they could be on another planet. It's as if Botticelli is telling us now that Christianity has nothing to do with the ancient classical world, owes it nothing, and perhaps is entirely different, came to usurp it and destroy it. All right? Botticelli maintains the large throngs of people typical of Magi paintings, but this is less about the pomp and circumstance of the pageantry of the scene. It's more about spiritual devotion. Do you see that? If we zoom in, you'll see it. Notice the postures of their hands and bodies. It reveals reverence and contemplation of the divine mystery that they're looking at. Now again, let's look at Joseph. His eyes again are barely open, but he also looks troubled, as well as a bit sleepy. And that gesture of his head resting in his hand is also a reference to the confusion, the disruption he's experiencing, the temptation to doubt whether God is involved in this miraculous event. I don't know if I would trust my young wife if she came and told me what Mary told him. Now, there are a couple of figures just to the left of Joseph that I want to focus on, but before that, do I have a question? Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think that was put in later. Yeah. We really don't know what color scheme Botticelli intended. Yeah. Yeah. Notice the people on the left, that guy in the green cloak. See him? Let's zoom in on him. See him there? And his cloak is wrapping another individual right next to him, and he is pointing. Some have argued, there's no real consensus on it, but many have argued that this is Savonarola instructing Lorenzo de' Medici to pay homage to the Christ child, to give up his wealth in service to the church. In other words, it's a symbol that the entire Medici family, all wealthy people, need to do the same. Give up their extravagant living and instead turn to a humble life of service to the faith. This kind of bothers me because I know from my study of history how much the Medici gave, and I'm going to tell you in a little bit. Yes? Mm-hmm. That's correct. 1498. 1497, he was burning luxury items. 1 year later, he was the vanity being burned. Ironic, isn't it? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Repeat your question again. Yeah. Yeah. She wanted the time that he was assassinated, put to death. So he painted this after Savonarola is dead. Savonarola, after being wildly popular, became wildly hated and despised. How quick that happens in 1 year. I don't know, if I was one of the wealthy, I would have started a campaign long ago to get rid of this guy, and that's probably what happened. The Pope certainly didn't like him because he was calling the Pope to repentance of his association with the wealthy and powerful. Not a smart idea for longevity, that's for sure. Okay. Cosimo de' Medici. When Lorenzo took over the family business after Cosimo died, he calculated what the family had spent on art and civic projects. It came out to 663,000 florins. I did a AI research on that amount, what it would be due today. It was a vast kind of number, either 100 million to 600 million dollars in spending power. More likely about $500 million the family had spent. So I don't like Savonarola's criticism of the family. They were quite generous. They definitely tithed, put it that way. Let me offer this quote from Cosimo for context. All those things, meaning works of art, have given me the greatest satisfaction and contentment because they are not only for the honor of God, but are likewise for my own remembrance. He did one of a legacy. For 50 years, I've done nothing else but earn money and spend money, and it became clear that spending money gives me greater pleasure than earning it. Oh, some feel that way here? All right. So Cosimo was no hoarder of his money. He didn't spend it on luxuries for himself necessarily. He did, he had a few, but he spent extravagantly in ways that benefited the city of Florence and its citizens. All right? Let's return to our work and try to bring some more clarity. One thing I want to acknowledge is that when there is great economic disparity, it doesn't matter what the median income is, there's resentment. Enmity develops when the economic disparity becomes too great. Are we not seeing that these days? All right? So obviously, I think we can all acknowledge that great economic disparity is not in the best interest of society, especially for peace and harmony. So that's what we're going to sort of hope to find some message in this painting that will help us clarify that. I want to break into a little exercise now with your table. All right? We only have 2 here. I don't know if you want to join another table, you can do that. Okay? And I want you to address some of the questions I've raised. Is there anything wrong with having great wealth? That's one question. Second, what is the proper use of wealth? I mean, who's entitled to tell whom how to spend their money? All right? Some of us, I want to bring this to mind, some of us may not have Medici-sized wealth, but compared to the rest of the world, we are all in the top 2 to 3%. Case in point, I've got one of these, do you? A supercomputer in the palm of my hand gives me access to nearly all the knowledge that I will ever need. I'd say I'm pretty wealthy. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, one thing that we need to keep clear in this little exercise is resentment is the result of a comparison game. Is it not? So, first of all, what is the proper use of wealth? Is there anything wrong with having great wealth? So break up into your table groups and let's do this for about 5 minutes. One more minute. Let's draw our lively conversations to a close, if you would. Anyone care to offer just a couple brief insights? All right, okay, so Molly Brown, he just made a comment. Molly Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown, she gave a large portion of her wealth to the building of a church. Anyone else comment from your group that you want to share? You won't be on record, all right? Obviously, our ideas are malleable, developing. That's part of being a growing human being. Yes? I'm glad you brought up Andrew Carnegie. She said that Andrew Carnegie, she remembers growing up around New York and knowing firsthand the tremendous amount that he gave. I mean, he gave half of his entire wealth, 50%, to charity. And he built a lot of libraries, as we know, research institutions, art institutions. The Metropolitan Museum owes much of its collection to him, along with J.P. Morgan as well. Also interesting about Andrew Carnegie, he wrote an essay called The Gospel of Wealth, where he has to defend the issues that you just brought up. I won't go into detail about that, but he did acknowledge in that essay, first of all, he says that anybody who dies wealthy is a horrible human being. He said, yeah, dies cursed is the way he put it. He who dies wealthy dies cursed. So he beckoned his fellow wealthy elites to give it all away before they died so that they would have control over where it goes. And it should all be used to benefit humanity. So that was his argument. However, he also knew that that's only possible to build great wealth in a capitalist society, which also naturally creates wealth gap and disparity. All right, he acknowledged that. It's like, that's the price you pay. All right? So it's very interesting. I encourage you to look that up. I've given an art brunch presentation on that, actually from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I gave it. It's on my YouTube channel, and I'll show you that at the last slide, how you can get there. But anyway, so he recognized that enmity naturally develops, and that the wealthy people must give in order to reconcile themselves to the common person. As a result, they have an obligation to do that. All right. Zoom in again. As we get closer to the Holy Family, the shepherds and the Magi, I'd like you to notice Botticelli's use of line and form. Look at the line form of the shepherds on the right. Notice how similar it is to Mary, her curves, the curves of her back and everything. Now look at the Magi on the left. Their lines, and notice how they parallel Joseph. Do you notice that? And also the angel's outstretched arm with the Magi, she's nearly touching Joseph, directing the Magi's attention as much to him as the Christ child. What is Botticelli trying to tell us? That the Magi, supposedly very wise men, yet they're supposed to be identified with the very perplexed Joseph, who must rely on divine understanding coming to him through dreams rather than human logic and knowledge. Now, what makes this painting particularly striking is Botticelli's radical choice to dress the Magi in simple, humble clothing, nearly indistinguishable from the Holy Family and others. This artistic decision breaks sharply with conventions established by Botticelli's contemporaries and even his own earlier works, as we saw. Gone are the richly jeweled and embroidered outfits, the spectacular pieces of goldsmith work containing the gifts of frankincense and myrrh and gold. Instead, these Magi appear in plain robes that could belong to any humble pilgrim. There is no distinction of rank or wealth in their appearance in this painting. Frankly, they don't even have gifts to present. Do you see the gold, frankincense, and myrrh anywhere? So these Magi kneel before the Christ child, not as earthly kings displaying the magnificence of their possessions, but as simple worshipers, offering their lives instead. This departure from convention is so complete that viewers familiar only with traditional Renaissance representations of the Magi might not even immediately recognize them in the work. It's only the context, the fact that it's a nativity scene, that we know that they are the wise men from the East. What makes this treatment even more remarkable is that Botticelli places these simply dressed Magi on the same level, visual level, as the shepherds as well. As you already know, the shepherds represent humility, poverty, while the Magi represent wisdom, wealth, and power. They're now on equal playing field. And by dressing the Magi in identical clothing of Mary and Joseph, and not that different from the shepherds, Botticelli erases social hierarchy in this work. The painting suggests that in the true Christian tradition, earthly distinctions of wealth and status become meaningless. This is the true image of socioeconomic equality, according to Botticelli. This visual leveling directly reflects Savonarola's social theology. He really is like a Robin Hood figure for Renaissance Italy. The friar had preached that true Christianity required abandoning the pursuit of wealth and embracing poverty. Now, in light of the conversation you just had with your table mates, do you agree with that? Savonarola had attacked the alliance between the church and the wealthy at the expense of the poor. In Botticelli's painting, we see this teaching made visual. The Magi have stripped themselves of their royal trappings and stand before Christ as humble supplicants, no different from the poor shepherd. I'm curious, what do you think of Savonarola now? It reflects his teaching that Florence would become great, not through accumulating riches, but through spiritual transformation. The apparent equality between Magi and shepherds illustrates the social justice message that Savonarola preached. The rich must give to the poor, not merely as charity, but as a recognition of fundamental human equality. And in this painting, that ideal is achieved. Now, someone last week asked if I was going to show more modern works on this subject related to the mystic nativity. So let me introduce you to another Italian artist who painted an adoration of the Magi. Gaetano Previati set his adoration of the Magi at the sea, of all places. That's artistic license, friends. Now, I am a sea person. That's really why I chose this work. I was drawn to it because it subverts traditional native nativity images, just like Botticelli's mystic nativity does. And I think he may have actually been inspired by Botticelli's mystic nativity. If the Renaissance artist can radically reinterpret this tradition in light of his own setting, cultural setting, well, so can I, Previati said. Now, he was known for his dreamlike, mystical, symbolic art, reinterpreting Christian themes in this light. Rather than using the conventional stable or ruined classical buildings, Previati employed the expansive seaside. Why would he employ the seaside? Well, perhaps there's a universality trying to be symbolized. The sea, with its vastness, may symbolize the global scale of Christ's birth and the Christian message of universal redemption, which was to spread across the world. Let those fall. I also think Previati used the seaside setting to enhance atmosphere. Look at this. Do you feel it? The open sky and horizon allowed Previati to offer a painting with light and reflection, just like the Impressionists, creating dramatic, ethereal atmospheres that blends the figures with the landscape. All right, so let's wrap this up. Botticelli's decision to dress the Magi in simple clothes like the shepherds in this painting represents one of the most radical departures from artistic convention during the Renaissance. The artistic choice directly reflects Savonarola's teachings on the need for the wealthy to give to the poor and to abandon the pursuit of material display in favor of spiritual devotion. Where traditional Renaissance depictions, including Botticelli's own earlier works, had portrayed the Magi as magnificent kings in luxurious clothing, the mystic nativity presents humble worshipers whose plain dress makes them indistinguishable from the poorest members of society. So he's leveled social hierarchies. The painting stands as evidence of the profound crisis of conscience that Savonarola's preaching had provoked in Botticelli. And I personally believe that the artist identified very closely with the perplexed Joseph. The reason we do not see Joseph's face, in my opinion, is because it was a self-portrait of Botticelli. The great artist who had created some of the most sensuous and worldly images of the Renaissance has stripped away all earthly worldly images in this painting. The splendor of the Magi has been humbled, suggesting that true wisdom and true power are spiritual rather than material qualities. This painting then challenges not just artistic convention, but the fundamental values of Renaissance society as a whole. It challenges our own society's values, doesn't it? It asks us to imagine a different kind of Renaissance, one in which wealth is recognized as a spiritual danger rather than a divine blessing, in which the rich acknowledge their obligation to the poor, in which the material display is abandoned in favor of humble devotion. However, let's be honest. Let's make it real. Every time utopian societies have been developed around the idea of social equality, disaster and death has been the result. So we need to take that into our thinking at this time. I don't want us to miss that. What about wealth in our own world and how we use it? What is your opinion? How should wealth be used? How should your wealth be used? Now, I don't think anybody here is at the Medici level. Raise your hand if you are, because I want to meet you. All right. You're not. All right? Let me give you my definition of wealth. Having the freedom and the resources to accomplish a significant goal. Significant in the sense of it's important to you. It's of utmost importance to you. Whatever that is, no matter how humble it may seem to others, that is the significant goal. Do you have the freedom and the resources to accomplish a significant goal? If so, You are fabulously wealthy. All right? With that, I want to take us through our Ignatian contemplation exercise to close us out. For those of you who missed it, Sawyer, can you pass those around? Let Sawyer know if you need one or if you want another one. Well, I think he's just going to pass them around every table. It's where we prepare. We do a kind of Visio Divina exercise where we look at a painting contemplatively, okay? We prepare ourselves by deep breathing and seeking guidance. You could do that through a prayer or just asking the universe or whatever, asking yourself to be present. Then we contemplate by entering the scene, taking it all in. And then we apply it by interacting with the scene. We imagine ourselves as particular characters. And today, we are the Magi. We are taking on their context, imagining ourselves in that experience. An angel is directing our attention, perhaps to Joseph more than the baby Jesus. What are you hearing as a Magi? What thoughts are arising in your head as a Magi? And afterwards, we reflect. We journal about it. If you write it down, you tell your unconscious, this is important. I need to remember it, something I need to work on. All right? So here we are. Be the Magi for about 5 minutes. Enter the scene. Go through that process. The Magi are the ones on the left. One's right here. He asked who the Magi were. That's right. That's the point. They don't. They look like anybody else. So you have entered, if you enter this painting, you've been humbled. Your finery, your silks, your furs, your jewelry has been stripped of you. You're just like anybody else. As you imagine yourself in the scene, what thoughts are arising? What feelings are you experiencing? Make note of them. We'll take one more minute. All right, take another deep breath. Give you the whole painting, along with my YouTube site, in case you're interested in looking at past videos. But at this time, I'd like to invite you to share your experience. Or if you have questions about something I've said earlier, go ahead and ask those. But the floor is open. Do not be shy. Yes, sir? Oh, my wealth is having the freedom and the resources to accomplish a significant goal. And by significant, I mean it's important to you. It's of utmost importance to you. Oh, I'm not sure, but the Magi were called to give of their wealth in a devotionary way to the church and to civic projects. I actually did give a art brunch series, and I think it is up on my YouTube site, on the wisdom of wealth. That's its title, so maybe you can find it there. The wisdom of wealth. Talked about the Rockefeller family, Carnegie, the Vanderbilts, who were not very wise with their wealth. Poster childs for that lack of wisdom when it comes to wealth. The Rothschilds. So you might want to look that up. But who would like to share anything, any kind of insight, any experience? Yes, sir. Mm. Yeah, it reminds me of a simple life like the Shaker hymn, to be simple and free. If you think about it, using our wealth to buy things like another home, another car, whatever it is, and you might very well need those, or that's fine, but it complicates your life just a little bit more, doesn't it? Just practically, it complicates something else you got to worry about, another insurance payment, you know? Something else you got to worry about getting stolen, protecting, you know? I'm not very black and white when it comes to wealth, by the way. I see great value in people who have a gift for making a lot of money in business or whatever it is. I mean, if you think about it, think of a calling you may have had to be a teacher, to be an athlete, to be an artist of some kind, to be an administrator or something. Well, if someone has been gifted and called, feels called to make a lot of money, well, should we criticize them when they do? Well, the how is important.
You mentioned the wealthy of 80, 100 years ago. You haven't mentioned the wealthy oligarchs today.
Mm.
Trumps and Musks. Those people primarily have not gotten their wealth through moral means. It's primarily through cheating and through oppression of the poor. And that's why we have so much disparity today between the poor and the wealthy, because there's a sense that the wealthy are stepping on the necks.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely that sense. Yeah. I don't know Elon Musk. I don't know Jeff Bezos personally. And I don't know the intimate details of their history and their business, the day-to-day activities. So I'm not an expert on whether their wealth was gained justly or not. I don't know. But I am curious about how you feel that he should be spending that wealth or using it. You know? Anybody? Go ahead, Kathleen. Okay, yeah. She's saying the proper use of wealth it should be used to benefit society so that it helps people get educated, empowers them in some way, gives them the resources they need to improve their life, basically is what I'm reading into it. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For those of you who couldn't hear, she said that the issue is our level of attachment to the wealth, whether it can be a virtuous resource or something negative. And that's something to think about. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I'm very curious, you may be mentioning this in a future presentation, but what the reaction to this meeting was at the time, whether it was an immediate reaction or a slow one, and so forth.
Nobody saw it. It was meant for private devotion, probably, most likely, Sandro Botticelli's own private devotion. It's not that large, about, I don't know, 3 feet by 4 feet. Yeah, and it was on canvas, not wood panel, which is what he normally painted on. So it could be rolled up if he needed it and hidden away. Because remember, Savonarola was not popular at the time that he painted this. But he still obviously is affected by Savonarola. So, thank you. All right, anybody else? Yes, in the back. Made her think of the role of empathy, how that impacts themselves and other human beings. One thing that I've learned from very wealthy people is that what comes along with wealth is fear, the fear of losing it. There's a great fear of losing it. That goes back to Kathleen's comment about attachment. And the more we're attached to the wealth, the greater negative impact it can have. The less attached, like Cosimo, seem to be just wanting to give it all away on art and churches and civic projects and that sort of thing. Granted, he also did that to gain influence over other people. So there was a pragmatic element. It wasn't just altruism, all right? But I don't think there's anything wrong with that if it benefits society too, you know? Yes? Oh, yeah. Oh, at the same time, the one he painted around the same time was this one right here. Painted out about, although he did not finish it. I don't know if it was the fact that he didn't get his second payment on the art, or because of the way he painted it without the classical setting, the typical iconography, that maybe the patron who paid him initially didn't want it. That happens a lot too. The patron is dissatisfied with the choices the artist is making and says, no deal. You know? All right, time for one more question or comment? Yes? Next week, we will explore his question. His question is about Joseph. He seems an enigma in this work. He's hard to figure out. But we're going to try to figure him out next week, along with Mary, maybe even the baby Jesus too. Why is he so fat? You know? All right, everybody, thank you so much again for offering your most precious asset, which is your time. Thank you again. I'm honored for that. Hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you next week.